Let me start with a simple question that sounds ordinary, but isn't. If tomorrow every record of what you've done disappeared, your degrees, your job title, your awards, your followers, your name on papers, would anything real be gone from the universe? The atoms wouldn't care. The stars wouldn't hesitate. Electrons would still do exactly what they did yesterday. Whatever you discovered, whatever you built, whatever you understood about nature would either still be true or it never was. That thought bothered Richard Feynman in a very quiet way. Not as a complaint, not as a rebellion, more like a loose thread he couldn't stop pulling. We live in a world full of labels. Scientist, great thinker, important discovery. But nature doesn't use labels. Nature doesn't keep score. Nature just behaves. Feynman was deeply aware of this mismatch. Humans talk about achievements. The universe talks only in outcomes. Here's a very ordinary analogy. Imagine a restaurant with a big sign out front that says, Arliss Best Bar GER, bright letters, awards painted on the window, 5-star reviews framed inside. That sign might attract a crowd, might make people feel impressed before they even take a bite. But the sign has nothing to do with whether the burger actually tastes good. The burger either works or it doesn't. Either satisfies your hunger or it doesn't. And the chemistry of cooking, the heat, the fat, the proteins, doesn't change just because someone wrote a compliment on the wall, is the sign. Knowledge is the burger. Feynman understood something that makes people uncomfortable. Humans are extremely good at admiring signs and extremely bad at checking what's underneath them. We reward names more than ideas. We remember titles more than explanations. We clap for conclusions without asking whether they're true. But truth doesn't care about applause. If you understand how something works, that understanding exists even if nobody knows you exist. And if you don't understand it, no amount of admiration can fix that. This is why Feynman treated fame as a kind of noise. Not evil, not immoral, just irrelevant to the main signal. Science to him wasn't a performance. It was a conversation with nature. And nature is very strict. It doesn't listen to your reputation. It doesn't care how confident you sound. It doesn't even care how hard you tried. You can be celebrated and wrong. You can be unknown and right. Those two facts are deeply unsettling to a social species like ours. We like to believe that recognition and correctness line up, that good ideas naturally rise to the top. Applause means truth, but reality doesn't promise any of that. Feynman loved knowledge because it was one of the few things that didn't depend on opinion. When you finally understand something, really understand it, there's a quiet click, a sense that nature has stopped arguing with you. No audience required. Richard Feynman often confused people, not because he was unclear, but because he refused to behave the way a successful scientist was expected to behave. He didn't move through the world collecting honors like proof of worth. He didn't seem especially impressed by ceremonies, titles, or formal respect. Sometimes he openly joked about them. To many observers, this looked like arrogance or rebellion. But that interpretation misses something important. Feynman wasn't trying to stand out. He was trying to stay honest. To see why, imagine a very simple situation. You're trying to fix a broken clock. You can take two approaches. One is to talk confidently about clocks, use the right words, let other people admire how knowledgeable you sound. The other is to quietly open the clock, look inside, make mistakes, adjust the gears, and see whether it actually starts ticking again. Only one of those approaches tells you anything about how time is being measured inside the clock. Feynman cared only about whether the clock worked. When he turned down honors or made light of prestigious awards, it wasn't because he thought they were evil or corrupt. It was because they had nothing to do with whether an idea was correct. An equation doesn't become truer when it receives a medal. A law of physics doesn't become deeper when it's announced with applause. He once pointed out something very uncomfortable. If a discovery is real, will still be real even if no one knows who discovered it. Nature doesn't attach name tags to its rules. Think about electrons. They don't behave differently because a famous person studied them. They don't speed up because a Nobel Prize was awarded. They don't care whether the experimenter was celebrated or ignored. They only follow the rules they follow. This created a strange freedom for Feynman. If fame doesn't matter to nature, it doesn't have to matter to you while you're trying to understand nature. You're allowed to be confused. You're allowed to ask naive questions. You're allowed to be wrong in public and correct yourself later. But once you start caring about reputation, all of that becomes dangerous. Confusion looks like weakness. Questions look like ignorance. Admitting you were wrong feels like losing status. So people hide their uncertainty. They polish explanations they don't fully understand. They defend ideas longer than they should. Feynman refused to play that game. He would rather look foolish for asking a basic question than look impressive while being confused. To him, not understanding something was an honest position. Pretending to understand was the real embarrassment. That's why he spent time doing things that didn't raise his status at all. Teaching introductory students, playing music, working problems that interested him even if they weren't fashionable. These activities fed his curiosity, not his reputation. He wasn't trying to reject society. He was trying to protect a fragile thing, the ability to think clearly without worrying about how it would look. Fame pulls your attention outward, toward how you are seen. Understanding pulls your attention inward, toward how things actually work. Feynman chose the second direction, again and again, not because it was noble, because it was the only way he knew to stay in contact with reality. When people talk about science, they often talk as if it were a collection of solid facts, neatly arranged, complete, and finished. But that picture is deeply misleading. Richard Feynman never saw knowledge as a completed structure. To him, it was more like a landscape full of fog, with a few clear paths and a vast amount of terrain still hidden. We do know some things. We know that matter is made of atoms. We know that atoms are composed of smaller parts, that these parts follow rules that can be written down in mathematics. We know that those rules are astonishingly precise. If you build an experiment carefully enough, the universe will give you the same answer every time to many decimal places. That reliability is real, and it matters. It's why science works at all. Feynman was equally interested in what that reliability does not explain. We can calculate how an electron behaves with incredible accuracy. We don't know why the electron exists in the first place. We can predict how particles interact. We don't know why the universe follows these particular laws instead of countless other possible ones. We can describe the machinery. The reason the machine exists at all remains unknown. This difference between how and why is easy to overlook. Humans are uncomfortable with unfinished stories. We like explanations that feel complete. When we learn an equation, we often treat it as an answer rather than a description. We say we understand something when we can repeat the steps, even if the deeper questions have simply been pushed out of sight. Feynman resisted that temptation. He insisted on keeping the unanswered questions visible. For him, knowledge wasn't about reaching certainty. It was about learning where certainty ends. Every time science advances, it draws a sharper boundary between what we can explain and what we cannot. Paradoxically, the better we get at explaining things, the more obvious the mystery becomes. This is not a flaw in science. It is its defining feature. If you imagine knowledge as a circle, then learning something new doesn't just add content inside the circle. It also increases the length of the boundary where knowledge meets ignorance. The more you know, the more clearly you see how much you don't. Feynman was comfortable living on that boundary. Many people aren't. They want science to deliver final answers, something solid to stand on. Science offers something more unsettling and more honest provisional understanding, models that work for now, explanations that are accurate within limits. And those limits matter. For example, we can calculate the behavior of systems with extraordinary success, but we still don't know why mathematics itself describes reality so well. The equations feel abstract, almost invented, and yet nature obeys them. That fact alone should make us uneasy in a productive way. Feynman didn't see this uncertainty as a failure. He saw it as an invitation. Everything were already known, curiosity would be pointless. If explanations were final, thinking would be unnecessary. The existence of the unknown is what gives knowledge its value. Understanding, in this sense, is not possession. It's participation. You take part in an ongoing attempt to make sense of a universe that is under no obligation to make sense to you. That ongoing attempt, with all its gaps and questions, was what Feynman truly loved. Humans like to believe that our love of knowledge is natural, that curiosity simply flows out of us because we are intelligent beings. But when you look closely, curiosity, for its own sake, is actually quite rare. What comes naturally to us is something else concern for how we are seen by others. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a group. If you were respected, you were protected. If you were ignored or rejected, you were vulnerable. Status wasn't an abstract idea. It was a matter of food, safety, and survival. Our brains were shaped under those conditions, and they still carry that wiring. Because of this, we are extremely sensitive to reputation. We track approval almost automatically. We feel pleasure when we are admired and discomfort when we are overlooked. This happens long before any careful reasoning kicks in. Curiosity does not trigger the same automatic reward system. If you imagine an early human staring at the stars, wondering why they move the way they do, that curiosity doesn't immediately help them hunt, gather, or defend themselves. In evolutionary terms, it's inefficient. It doesn't obviously increase survival in the short term. So our minds tend to ask a different set of questions. Is this useful? Will this impress others? Does this raise my standing? That's why humans so often struggle with the idea of valuing knowledge without external reward. We want learning to lead somewhere visible, a credential, a title, a measurable outcome that signals worth to others. Feynman understood that this tendency creates a deep conflict with genuine understanding. The moment you start caring about how your thinking will be judged, your thinking changes. You become cautious in the wrong ways, You avoid admitting ignorance. You hesitate to ask simple questions. You prefer ideas that sound impressive over ideas that are accurate. In science, this is dangerous. Nature does not respond to confidence or prestige. It responds only to what actually happens when you perform an experiment. If your theory is wrong, reality will contradict you, no matter how elegant or popular the theory is. But social systems don't work that way. In social systems, confidence can be mistaken for competence. Repetition can be mistaken for truth. Authority can replace evidence. Feynman was acutely aware of this mismatch. He knew that the habits that help you rise in social hierarchies are often the same habits that prevent clear thinking. That's why valuing knowledge over fame feels so difficult. Requires pushing against instincts that once kept us alive. It asks us to tolerate uncertainty, obscurity, and the discomfort of not being admired. Most people would rather feel certain than be correct. They would rather appear knowledgeable than admit confusion. Feynman made the opposite choice. He allowed himself to not know. He treated confusion as a starting point rather than a failure. He accepted that understanding might never bring applause. This wasn't a moral stance. It was a practical one. Your goal is to understand reality. You have to align yourself with how reality works, not with how humans judge one another. That alignment is uncomfortable, often lonely, and deeply unsuited to fame. But it is the only environment in which honest knowledge can grow. And that is why humans struggle so much with this idea. It asks us to step outside the psychological habits that feel natural and to adopt a way of thinking that nature rewards. But society often does not. Imagine a child sitting on the floor with a radio. It's not an expensive radio, and it's not especially valuable. The child isn't planning to fix it, sell it, or show it to anyone. The radio has simply stopped working, and the child wants to know what's inside. So the child opens it up. Screws come out. The back panel comes off. Inside, there are wires, coils, and strange little components whose purposes aren't obvious. The child doesn't know the names of most of the parts. That doesn't matter. The point isn't vocabulary. The point is to see how the pieces fit together. This kind of curiosity is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for permission or applause. It's driven by a simple question. What is actually going on here? Richard Feynman recognized this attitude immediately because he had it himself. To him, the universe was like that radio, complicated device producing remarkable behavior and inviting inspection, but never promising that the inspection would be rewarded in any obvious way. Most adults lose this attitude, not because they become less intelligent, but because other concerns take over. We start asking whether an activity is productive, respectable, or impressive. We want to know what the outcome will be and how it will be judged. If you shout at the child, "Why are you doing that?" no one will praise you for it. The question sounds absurd. The child isn't doing it to be praised. The curiosity exists on its own. But that question stops sounding absurd when applied to adults. Why study something obscure? Why ask a basic question? Why explore an idea that might not lead anywhere? Those questions quietly train people to abandon curiosity unless it has an audience. Feynman resisted that training. He believed that curiosity justified itself. If something puzzled him, that was reason enough to explore it. He didn't need a guarantee that the exploration would be useful, admired, or remembered. This attitude shaped how he approached science. He wasn't trying to build a public image as a genius. He was trying to figure out how nature worked, one small piece at a time. Child taking apart the radio doesn't expect the device to explain itself. The child doesn't demand a final answer. Sometimes the radio never works again, but something is still gained a better sense of what's inside and how complicated even an ordinary object can be. That's how Feynman saw learning. Understanding didn't mean possessing the whole truth. It meant becoming more familiar with the machinery of reality, even if parts of it remained mysterious. There is also a kind of humility in this approach. The child doesn't assume the radio owes them clarity. The child accepts confusion as part of the process. Adults, by contrast, often feel entitled to explanations. When understanding doesn't come quickly, they become frustrated or dismissive. Feynman accepted confusion as a natural state. He knew that the universe doesn't have to make sense to us. The fact that it makes sense at all, even partially, is remarkable. Seeing the world this way changes how you value knowledge. Learning stops being a ladder you climb for recognition and becomes an exploration you participate in for its own sake. In that sense, the child on the floor with the radio wasn't wasting time. They were doing the most honest kind of thinking there is. Feynman often warned about a subtle trap that many people fall into. Confusing symbols with reality. It's easy to mistake knowing a word for knowing the thing the word describes, or knowing an equation for understanding the phenomenon it models. Humans do this constantly. We memorize names, formulas, labels, and procedures, and then congratulate ourselves for having learned something. But memorization is not comprehension. Familiarity with symbols does not equal familiarity with nature. Think about how this works in practice. You might be able to recite the equation for Newton's law of gravitation. Efta jivak ard. You might even be able to use it in problems and get the right answer. Yet do you understand gravity itself? Do you understand why objects attract each other across empty space, or why the force appears exactly as it does? The equation is a symbol. Reality is the interaction of masses across space. One can be memorized, the other must be experienced through observation, experiment, and reasoning. Feynman made a point of returning to the physical world. He wanted to see the phenomena, touch them, manipulate them. He once said, if you want to find out anything from the theoretical physics point of view, you better make damn sure you understand the experiment. Theory without experiment is like a map with no terrain. The symbols may look beautiful. They do not guarantee that your understanding corresponds to reality. This distinction becomes even more striking in everyday life. People often treat titles, awards, or credentials as proof that someone understands something. But reality is indifferent to credentials. Nature doesn't care whether an explanation is delivered by a Nobel laureate or a high school student. It only responds to accurate reasoning and correct observation. Feynman loved reminding people that the universe does not negotiate based on reputation or confidence. Reality simply is. Understanding is not linear. It is not accumulated like a collection of trophies. It grows through error, through repeated confrontation with what is actually happening. You make a guess, test it, fail, adjust, and test again. You refine your mental model based on feedback from the world, not from applause or praise. The symbols, equations, words, diagrams are just tools to help keep track of that process. They are not the process itself. That is why valuing knowledge over fame requires humility. You must be willing to be wrong in public, to revise your beliefs constantly, and to tolerate the discomfort of realizing that symbols are never reality. Feynman thrived in that environment. He saw confusion not as a weakness, as a sign that you are engaging with reality instead of comforting yourself with symbols. When nature disagrees with your predictions, that is the universe speaking. Listen carefully. You will learn. Ignore it, and the symbols will become a kind of prison. The pursuit of knowledge, in this sense, is deeply unglamorous, and yet it is exhilarating. It is quiet, iterative, and largely invisible. There is no audience to cheer you on, and no guarantee that your insight will ever be recognized. But it is also direct. The feedback is real. Nature either conforms to your model or it does not. The process rewards clarity, not status, honesty, not appearances. Feynman's joy came precisely from engaging with this unfiltered reality and from the clarity that emerges when symbols finally align with observation. In the end, what he teaches us is that reality is always stranger, subtler, and more beautiful than the names we give it. Equations, awards, and titles are comforting, but they are not the world. We want to know the universe. We must look beyond symbols, beyond the applause, beyond the status. We must listen, experiment, and engage directly with the phenomena themselves, no matter how invisible or uncelebrated that engagement may be. It is in this relentless pursuit, and only here, that true understanding begins.